Hi, good morning. Today we're doing a webinar on the 4 transformative forces of the API management market. I am Ed Anuff, the head of product at Apogee at Google, and I'm joined by Shankar Ramaswamy, who
lead engineering at Apogee. Thank you, Ed.
Also now at Google as well.
Yes, at Google, yes.
We should make mention of that fact as well. So we're going to talk to you today about a lot of the trends that we're seeing that are changing the way that our customers think about APIs and API management within their architecture that are influencing us as we develop our roadmap. And there's been a lot of interesting things that we've been seeing in a macro sense that have been changing people's thinking. We've seen this whole trend towards API first and API centric architectures. And for a lot of our customers who previously had come from an integration centric or an ESB centric architecture, now this move to APIs is an exciting thing that's causing them to rethink a lot of their approaches. We're seeing new development practices, and we're seeing that the cloud landscape has added a lot more choice. It isn't, in fact, just as simple as am I running in my data center or am I in my cloud. There's a lot of aspects of that, facets of that we're going to get into detail. But these have all basically influenced the evolution of the market as we've seen it. We look at this kind of with, both Shankar and I have been long students of history of what's been happening in APIs, and we've seen this sort of shift from APIs from shared services to being these managed APIs or productized APIs. I think sometimes you refer to them as. And now we're seeing this idea of new forms of platform as a service, container orchestration, where the services are now part of the deployment units, and this idea of brokered services that we'll also talk about in a little bit, but also changing the conversation around APIs. So these have been some of the things that we've been watching over really the last number of years, and we've distilled them recently into sort of this set of 4 transformative forces. And that's what we want to talk to you about today, is really sort of how each one of these is shaping our thinking. These are multi-cloud hybrid, the influence of open source, the importance of developers in selecting, choosing, and operating the technology, and then finally the impact of cloud native architecture on API management. So with that in mind, let's get started on the first one of these, in multi-cloud and hybrid. Shankar, this has changed things quite a bit, right? Probably, I would say sort of has had the biggest impact for everybody thinking about this stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I think APIs are now starting to show up everywhere, and it's not just in places you would think like data centers and public clouds, but also in places like stores and branches, right? And so some of our customers, in retail or in banking and others, they have, lots of thousands of stores and branches, and they do want to put APIs in all of those places as well. And so this has, some fairly profound implications for the architecture, because now you're talking about, a few orders of magnitude growth in the number of APIs that need to be managed, and also several orders of magnitude growth in the number of places these APIs run, right? So now you're talking about millions of APIs running in tens of thousands of locations. And the architecture that's needed to kind of manage those APIs is a very different architecture from what we've seen to date.
Yeah, I mean, the way people used to handle this was to go and try to do the old school ESB hub and spoke model, which just doesn't work for this new.
It would not. Yes, it would not scale to this level of deployment.
So this has caused there to be really 2 requirements. One is, even though it is massively decentralized, we still need to manage it, and we need to and we need to be able to manage it centrally. I mean, decentralized, but also, there is somebody who's going to want to be able to have the overview of everything that's happening.
And that is the challenge, right? Yes. That is exactly the challenge, which is you want this decentralized deployment, but then you want the central visibility and management, because at the end of the day, you are looking to deliver to an SLA across these APIs. You are looking to secure the end-to-end interaction chain, right? And so those problems have to be tackled, and there's no question that there's going to be some central pieces that have to tackle these problems.
So this has had a pretty big impact on how we've thought about and built our product. Because if you went 5-6 years back, most folks like ourselves that were creating API management products, we were building monolithic products. Yes. We were simply trying to deal with one exposure point of APIs external to the organization. But now we're talking about managing APIs everywhere. So this has definitely been probably one of the main focuses for Apogee, for our developers and so on. So
absolutely.
How have we tackled this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually looked at how we decouple the runtime from the management and analytics, and basically create this sort of loose coupling that allows the runtime to be dispersed and distributed all over. I sometimes like to use the brain versus muscle analogy. And so you've got the muscle widely dispersed, but the brain is in few tens of centers around the world. And so one of the things we're doing is introducing the concept of a nervous system, right? Yep. That kind of connects the brain and the muscle in this dispersed way. Not atypical, not very different from how evolution happened with very large creatures, right? Yep. Which developed very complex nervous systems and muscular systems. And that's really how we're thinking about next generation of API management.
And one of the things that we've done a lot of work on has been this concept of a micro gateway.
Yes.
So having a small footprint gateway that can be deployed in as many places as possible, the store locations
Absolutely.
You were talking about, or even on devices,
Absolutely.
so that you can basically manage APIs pervasively wherever they are.
Absolutely, and we're going to talk more about gateway choice, but
Yep.
that is absolutely something that's going to happen is as you can imagine, when you have so many deployment points and the environments are so different, like in a store, it's going to be a challenging environment with very small servers and so on, and you have to have a variety of footprints, right, and gateways that meet those requirements.
So generally, if I'm thinking about APIs and I want to manage APIs, I should be unconstrained with the idea of saying these are APIs being served by workloads in my data center, or on AWS or GCP or Azure or any of these other clouds. Exactly. I need to be able to think holistically. I need to be managed all those APIs wherever they are.
Correct. And
I can't be forced into sort of a selection where I can only manage my APIs in one location.
Absolutely. I think you should focus on locating your APIs where they're best located,
right,
and not worry about the API management. The API management should follow the APIs.
Yep. Now that makes a lot of sense. Let's take a look at sort of the next major influence that we've seen with API management, and this has been the importance of open source as part of the platform. And the way that I've always thought about open source is that open source starts to make sense, and makes a lot of sense when the problem is very well understood. Mm-hmm. And API management, we've been doing API management for a decade now. Many aspects of it are things that people are saying, okay, I understand the basic concept of a gateway, I understand some of these concepts, and so they're asking us, Apogee, I understand and I value what you guys are doing, but I also, open source is very important within my architecture. So we've been thinking about that, and we've been doing a lot on that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've had an open source gateway, micro gateway, for over a year now. Okay. And we've had plenty of customers actually contribute, and others, right, adopt the micro gateway and contribute back into the community, which is really the beauty of open source, right? You can sort of help make it whatever you want it to be. And then more recently, we're working with our colleagues in Google around the Istio project,
yep,
which we recently announced.
Very powerful for microservices, especially. Yeah.
Absolutely. Our micro gateway has been used more for internal APIs, yep, and one of the things that we were surprised with is initially we thought the micro gateway would be used in sort of a very configuration-driven model, where people would pretty much just configure a set of policies and execute them. But lo and behold, we're actually surprised to see a lot of people actually writing custom modules and doing things like mediation and connecting to their own sort of internal systems and so on. So a lot of what we see with our enterprise gateway, we're seeing with the micro gateway as well, which is kind of surprising. But I'm not surprised, given that people have such wide heterogeneous environments and so much of investment in legacy technology.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of those things in hindsight that makes a lot of sense, which is that open source facilitates collaborations and ecosystems and reuse and innovation. And so I think that was one of the really exciting things with the micro gateway, was the fact that by opening up this component of our product to let people really just tinker with it and take it wherever they want, that we've seen a lot of really exciting use cases. I mean, we've seen it adapted for IoT, we've seen it deployed in a variety of different ways. So that's pretty exciting stuff. Now, our strategy around open source really follows this brain versus muscle scenario that you've talked about, right?
Correct, absolutely, yeah. So we're right now, in fact, if you look at the open source activity, it's all around the muscle, right? There are lots of gateways appearing, lots of different platforms being used. Things like Nginx, or in the case of Istio, it's using Envoy, right? And so we see a lot of that activity. There isn't as much activity on the management and analytics side, right, the brain side, right? And that turns out to be the harder problem, right? And it's also, as you said, less well understood, yeah, right? And so I think people are starting to think about that piece, but it's far behind, right? The gateway is where the action is today in the open source front.
Although we definitely do leverage a lot of open source, yes, in our processing of data and so on.
Yes, we do. Yes, absolutely, we do.
Yeah, and I think that, I do think that the ecosystem component, I think that the community component is one of the things I'm most excited about, because I think that what we see a lot of times from an enterprise perspective is that we're solving very big, difficult problems that people have, but we also want to be able to see this stuff used very pervasively. We'd love to see, a world where every developer is thinking about how they manage their APIs from the outset, and how can we make this sort of low footprint and easily to incorporate, and open source is going to be a big piece of that story.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So along those lines, though, that does bring us to this idea of developer-led adoption and developer-led usage. In the early days of API management, API management was something that wasn't what the developer thought about. I mean, this was one of the things that I think you and I have talked about quite a bit, was that the developers didn't really get API management in the early days. IT got it.
Yes.
They were like, I've got all these developers building APIs, I need a control plane, I need some way to govern this. Yeah. But the individual developers didn't get that. And then now they are. And
yes,
there's a couple of different factors. DevOps is one of them, because now developers have responsibility for their APIs in production.
Correct. And what developers have also come to accept is that you do need a layer of management around APIs. In fact, you're seeing some of the modern Java frameworks, like Uber frameworks, like JHipster and others, that kind of include API management as part and parcel of these Uber frameworks. And so I think developers are absolutely catching on. I suspect that mobile developers caught onto it a bit early on, right? Because they were forced to expose their APIs to the internet, and so they probably realized they needed some.
Lot of security and reliability issues, and having done some mobile development myself, I've seen that it's very easy to create your own distributed denial of service.
Yes.
If your mobile apps are if you've got a successful mobile app and it's hitting your APIs incorrectly.
Absolutely. And the one thing that I think we'll see a lot of is developers love choice, right? And they love freedom. I mean, you can see this in the number of frameworks and languages that are popular out there. I mean, even if you take one language like Java, you can see that everybody has their own favorite frameworks in Java, and so we're going to see that in the world of gateways and API management as well, where people will, I think, choose different gateways and different approaches to API management. And that is something that we're looking to support, right?
So all that stuff falls under this term developer experience,
yes,
which has been something we've heard quite a bit over the last few years, and obviously people have heard the terms user experience and customer experience, But developer experience is now this new concept and something that we spend a lot of time thinking about it, in our meetings and so on, trying to create the right developer experience. And so developers seem to have a set of preferences that go towards do things fit within their workflows, their styles of development, and also there's some architectural preferences too. So lightweight architectures seem to be something you hear time and again. People don't want something large and monolithic and hard to run. It's got to be simple to use.
And on the flip side, with all this developer choice, comes the IT nightmare, right? Which is they've got now a fragmented world that they need to manage, and that's something we're thinking about a lot, right? Which is how do we give developers that choice, the ability to do what they need to do to be productive, and on the other hand, help IT kind of corral all of this and make sense of it and manage it centrally.
Well, I think that's really where at least from the Apogee perspective, where we hope to add a lot of value is to be able to provide both the best-in-class developer experience and the enterprise experience, because you need both of those to be especially for companies that really are trying to take this journey of going API first on everything that they're doing.
Absolutely.
And so let's take a look at this last one, because this has been, I look at this and I think, we were sort of moving along in the API management world, making, great progress when the workloads were, well, for the most part, I will say really sort of the last decade was the decade of J2EE app servers, and people had standardized. Sure, there were some folks doing .NET and what have you, but when we deal with our customers, we just hear the same thing over and over again. It's like, oh, there's my app server, and so what they would ask for us is something that could easily sit in front of the app server.
Correct.
And it was great. There was sort of this delineation. It was like, okay, this is what the API tier is going to deal with. This is what the app server is going to deal with. And then the cloud native platforms came with a lot of assumptions around DevOps and a lot of process assumptions around those. And completely changed things around, and so we've had to put a lot of thinking into that.
Absolutely. And these container or container driven or container led kind of environments are ones where they're very dynamic, right? So the API management problem shifts a little bit, because now it's all about APIs that come and go.
Yes.
And you don't know, who's kind of the endpoint that's actually servicing an API, and so you need sort of a lot of location and routing and client-side load balancing and circuit breaking and all of those kinds of things. And also service-to-service authentication becomes very important, because you want to know who's talking to who, right? And so this is where the whole microservices frameworks are starting to get popular as well.
Definitely from the microservices frameworks, but we've done a lot of stuff even just before people get to microservices on those. Things like with Cloud Foundry,
yes, absolutely,
being able to go and do using route services for being able to add API management to your apps.
Absolutely.
We've been working with Pivotal on meta build packs, so that we're part of the build process, and then also being able to do deployments within because when people deploy these platforms as a service, there's a lot of automation involved in it. In the Cloud Foundry universe, they use Bosch to do that. So we've done
we've done a Bosch installer,
installer, and so on. And so it's interesting because these platforms bring a whole new set of processes and tools with them. And our strategy has been to make sure that we are providing a native experience.
Yes.
And because that's been the requirement, right?
Absolutely. And tying it back to the earlier conversation about developers, right? It is, these platforms are also looking to make the developer experience very simple and seamless. And so a lot of the work we've done is to figure out how to add API management in there transparently and seamlessly, like with the meta build packs or other things, so that we don't have the developer consciously think about API management, right? And they just say, hey, I'm deploying an API, and the API management just comes for free, right?
And so exactly. And so the interesting thing, though, and this is where where microservices come in, but actually all service usage, is that that within these platforms they want to encourage a model where you're thinking about your services as part of the dependencies, because they're all
Absolutely.
about having these deployment units where you've got all of your dependencies tied together.
Exactly.
And so that's been interesting as well. There's a lot of interesting things happening, for example, in the Cloud Foundry world with the service broker, and within Kubernetes now the open service broker, which is taking that concept and bringing it to the Kubernetes world. And we've been doing a lot of thinking about how API management can solve both, not just the exposure side, so I've got my app and I need to put APIs out there, but a lot of this is about solving the consumption side problem.
Yes.
What services is my app dependent on, and what do I need to do about credentials and so on.
Absolutely. Actually, if you think about it, it's actually dependency injection taken out, right?
Yes, exactly.
And turned into a tier on its own that allows you to sort of take these different deployable units or independently deployed units, independently managed units, and connect them up together, right? And so absolutely, the service broker pattern is really about that.
And just to sort of summarize before we wrap things up, as we look at API management, so if I was somebody who was either using API management from Apogee, or I was thinking about expanding my API management, or selecting a new API management solution. These are really these would be sort of the four paramount things that you really would need to be thinking about. Otherwise there'd be a very high likelihood that you would need to go and change what you were doing in a very short order, because any one of these four things is creating a lot of disruption, and this is really, this has been something that's been underway for some time, but this is really, I think, sort of over the next 18 months, we're going to see all of these.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that we're seeing this already with a lot of customers, right? Very large enterprises are already experiencing all of these trends, and I think it's just going to grow rapidly over the next year and a half, 2 years, and yeah, you're absolutely right.
Cool. Well, it's an exciting time for us and for our customers, and so looking forward to delivering the next generation of our products, and of course now doing that as part of Google, where we're able to do so with a lot of other great technologies and great folks helping us with that.